I never planned for it to happen. That's the first thing I'd tell anyone if they asked. If anyone cared to ask. But nobody ever does, not really. They just see the wreckage, point fingers, and decide what kind of man you are without knowing a damn thing about how you got there. It started with an email. Just one of those generic reunion invitations that usually get buried under a pile of junk mail and spam. I almost deleted it without a second glance. Almost. But then my eyes caught something that made me pause. A list of confirmed attendees. And there she was. Claire Dawson. The name pulled me back years in an instant, like a hook lodged deep in my ribs, yanking me through time. I hadn't thought about Claire in forever. Or at least that's what I told myself. We had history, messy, unfinished history. Back in high school, we were close in a way that was always teetering on the edge of something more, but we never quite crossed the line. Not really. Then, just like that, she moved away, and life did what life always does. It kept moving. I sat there, fingers hovering over the keyboard, staring at her name like it had some kind of power over me. I shouldn't care. I was married. Happily? That was harder to answer. Not unhappy, just routine. Life with Lena was predictable. Safe. She made schedules, planned things down to the last detail, left little room for surprises. And I wasn't sure when, exactly, that it started to feel like a cage. I told myself I wasn't interested in Claire. That I wasn't going to the reunion for her.
But I went anyway.
The venue was fancier than I expected. One of those high-end hotels with chandeliers and sleek furniture, the kind of place designed to impress. The moment I stepped inside, nostalgia hit me like a freight train, familiar faces, laughter echoing in the air, drinks flowing freely. But none of it mattered because then she walked in. Claire hadn't changed much. Still carried herself with that effortless confidence, like she belonged anywhere she stepped. She had this laugh that turned heads, the kind that made you want to be the reason for it. And when she saw me, really saw me, something shifted. Well, she said, swirling her drink. I was wondering if you'd show.
We talked.
Reminisced. The years between us melted away, like they were never there. And the more we talked, the more I realized how easy it felt, how much lighter I was around her. Like I could breathe. Like I wasn't just a husband with responsibilities and bills and expectations. I was just me. One drink turned into two. Two into more. And the night blurred into something that should have never happened. Claire followed me to the hotel. Or maybe I followed her. I could try to explain it, but explanations don't change the outcome. I came home 2 days later. The business trip excuse was already lined up, neatly packaged in my head. I had practiced it on the drive back, made sure it sounded casual, natural, like there was nothing to question. Lena was in the kitchen when I walked in, her back to me. She was stirring a cup of coffee, phone in her other hand, posture tense. Nothing about the scene was unusual, but something felt off. She didn't turn around, didn't rush to greet me, ask how my trip went, or give me that small, knowing smile she always did when I got home. Instead, she was silent. That silence crawled under my skin. I cleared my throat, setting my bag down.
Hey.
Everything okay? Slowly, deliberately, she turned, met my gaze. And in that moment I knew she knew. Did you have a good time? The way she said it sent a ripple of unease through me. There was no warmth in her voice, no curiosity. Just an edge, sharp and cold. I forced a chuckle, tried to act normal.
Yeah.
Meetings ran long, but it was productive. She tilted her head slightly, studying me like I was some kind of puzzle she was putting together. Then she took a slow sip of her coffee, like she was giving me time to say more, to trip over myself. Lena wasn't the kind of woman who asked questions she didn't already know the answers to. And somehow she knew everything. I stood there, feeling like a man who had just stepped onto thin ice and heard the first crack. Lena wasn't looking at me like a wife greeting her husband after a trip. There was no curiosity, no welcome, no hint of the usual expectation that I'd fill the silence with stories about bad hotel food or long meetings. Instead, she stood perfectly still, coffee in hand, her expression calm in a way that made my pulse kick up a notch. Something was wrong. I could feel it, thick in the air, pressing down on me like a weight I hadn't noticed until now. Still, I played my part, acted normal, because normal was the only thing keeping me afloat. I cleared my throat, forcing a smile.
Hey.
Everything okay? Lena turned slightly, tilting her head as if studying me from a new angle. She didn't smile back, didn't answer right away. She just let the silence stretch. Then finally, she exhaled a quiet breath, the kind that sounded almost amused but wasn't. You're asking me? That should have been my first warning. The first real, solid signal that I needed to tread carefully. But I wasn't thinking like a man in danger. I was thinking like a man who still believed he had control of the situation. Yeah. I gave a small, forced chuckle, hoping to soften whatever this was. You seem, I don't know, different. She let out another short breath, something between a scoff and a laugh. Then, in a voice too casual to be real, she murmured, I had some time to think while you were away. I swallowed. Something about the way she said that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I try to keep my face neutral, keep my movements slow, deliberate. Yeah? About what? Lena finally moved, setting her mug down on the counter with a soft clink. Then she crossed her arms, her fingers tapping lightly against her elbow. About you. That was when the second crack appeared. I had been careful. So damn careful. The lie had been airtight. The flights booked, the itinerary solid, the text to Lena sent at just the right times to make sure nothing seemed suspicious. I had even answered a few of her messages while I was with Claire, keeping everything vague but convincing, complaining about long meetings, mentioning how exhausted I was, how I barely had time to grab a real meal. There was no reason for her to suspect a thing. So why did she look at me like she already had the truth? Lena tapped her fingers against her arm again, slow and rhythmic. Then she tilted her head. How was Boston? My stomach dropped. Boston. That was the moment I realized I had never actually told her where my fake trip was supposed to be. Lena had just thrown out a random city, a fishing line in Stillwater. And I almost bit. The word good was already forming in my mouth before my brain caught up, slamming on the brakes, so hard I nearly choked on my own breath. I forced a casual shrug, adjusting my bag strap as if the weight of it was what made me stiff.
Long.
You know how these conferences are. I waved a hand like I was already bored just thinking about it. Meetings, small talk, overpriced lunches. The usual. Lena nodded slowly. That sound. That single, meaningless sound. It was worse than a full accusation. I could feel the noose tightening. Then she reached into her pocket,
Pulled something out.
a folded slip of paper, a receipt. She smoothed it out on the counter, pressing her palm against it, and my eyes immediately caught the logo at the top. The Regency Grand Hotel.
Not in Boston.
Not anywhere near my imaginary business trip.
No.
It was the same damn hotel where I had been with Claire. I found this in the laundry, Lena said, her voice flat. It was in your jeans pocket. I stared at it, my mind scrambling, running a dozen different escape routes at once.
Deny. Deflect.
Minimize.
Lie.
I let out a short, dry laugh, shaking my head. That's weird. I don't even remember being there. Her eyes narrowed. Really?
Yeah.
I forced a casual chuckle. I mean, I could have stopped in for coffee or something before heading to the airport. Lena didn't blink. Coffee.
Yeah.
I shrugged, as if the explanation was so obvious it barely needed saying. Or maybe I met a client there. You know how it is, sometimes they pick the place, not me. Still, she said nothing. She just let the silence stretch between us, let it settle around me like quicksand. I could feel it then.
The shift.
This wasn't suspicion anymore. It was confirmation. The thing about Lena, she wasn't the type to explode. She didn't throw things, didn't scream, didn't launch into tearful accusations. No, she was something worse. She was cold. And I had seen her angry before. But this was different. This was fury, concentrated and quiet, like a storm building over the horizon, not quite broken yet, but promising destruction when it did. And worst of all, she wasn't asking for the truth. She wasn't demanding an explanation, because she didn't need one. She already knew. Lena reached for her coffee, took a slow sip, then turned and walked out of the kitchen without another word. And just like that, I knew. I was screwed. Lena didn't slam the door. She didn't throw anything, didn't scream, didn't cry. She just walked away. And somehow that was worse. I stood there, staring at the empty space where she'd been, my mind scrambling to process what had just happened. My heart was still pounding, adrenaline buzzing through me, but I couldn't move. I couldn't even think. She knew. Not suspected. Not wondered. Not questioned. She knew. And I had no idea what the hell I was supposed to do next. For the next hour, the house was eerily silent. I wandered from room to room, pretending I had things to do, but my ears were tuned to the sound of her movements. She was upstairs in the bedroom, and I didn't know what she was doing. Packing? Calling a lawyer? Planning how she was going to destroy me? I thought about going up there, but what was I supposed to say? Hey, I know you caught me lying, but can we pretend this never happened?
Yeah. No.
Instead, I made a drink. Not a strong one, just enough to take the edge off, enough to slow my thoughts before they ran off a cliff. I stood by the kitchen window, staring out at the backyard, swirling the glass in my hand. How the hell had she found out? The receipt? That was sloppy, sure, but it wasn't enough. A receipt could mean anything. A business meeting, a last-minute hotel change, hell, even a mistake. But the way she had looked at me, she had more. I heard her footsteps before I saw her. Lena came down the stairs, slow and deliberate, and I turned just as she stepped into the living room. She was holding something. Her phone. She didn't say anything, just held it up, her finger tapping the screen. Then, without looking at me, she pressed play. A voice filled the room. Not mine. Not hers. Claire's. You should have stayed the extra night. My blood turned to ice. I miss you already. I didn't recognize the recording. I didn't remember Claire saying those words. But there they were, spilling out from Lena's phone. Undeniable. Then the sound of my own voice, short, amused. Your trouble? Not much. Barely anything. But enough. Lena finally looked at me. You but dialed me. My mouth went dry. I didn't answer, at first, she continued, her voice eerily calm. Thought maybe it was a mistake. But then I heard her voice. I had nothing. No words, no excuses, no explanations that would make this go away. Lena's lips curled in something that wasn't quite a smile. I figured you'd lie. She tossed the phone onto the coffee table, the screen still glowing. I didn't reach for it. My mind was spinning. How the hell did I screw up that badly? You weren't in Boston, she said. You never even left the city. You were shacked up in a hotel with your high school sweetheart while I was home, being the perfect wife. She paused, tilted her head. Did I get all that right? I opened my mouth, but nothing came out. What was I supposed to say? No, you're wrong? She had proof. She had the receipt. She had the recording. She had me. I did what any man would do when backed into a corner. I denied everything. You're overreacting, I said, voice steady. You're making this into something it isn't.
Lena let out a short laugh.
Oh, that's rich. It's not what you think. Her eyes flashed. Really? Because it sounds exactly like what I think. I ran a hand through my hair, forcing a sigh like I was the one who had been wronged. Like I was dealing with some kind of crazy accusation. You don't have the whole story, I said. You heard a couple of words and decided you knew everything. That's not fair. Lena just shook her head. You're pathetic. I should have stopped. I should have shut up. But I was panicking. And panic makes you stupid. You're twisting this. I pushed, stepping forward. You. She held up a hand. And I froze. Not because I was afraid, but because of the look in her eyes. The finality. I'm done, she said. 2 words. And just like that, the ground beneath me cracked wide open. Lena turned, walked to the side table, and picked up an envelope I hadn't noticed before. Then she tossed it onto the coffee table, right next to her phone. I didn't have to open it to know what it was. The way she stood, The way she looked at me, it was already written all over her face. She had already made up her mind. This was never going to be a conversation, Lena said, her voice low. It's done. And then she did what I never expected. She smiled. Not a kind smile. Not a sad one. A freeing one. She turned and walked out of the room, leaving me standing there with nothing but the envelope, the phone, and the realization that I'd just lost everything. I didn't touch the envelope. Not at first. I stared at it like it might explode, like opening it would make everything real in a way I wasn't ready for. But deep down, I already knew Lena had planned this. She hadn't just found out and reacted in the heat of the moment. No, she had waited, gathered evidence, let the anger settle into something cold, something sharp, something that cut deeper than screaming ever could. That realization made my chest tighten. She had been done with me before I even walked through the door. I finally moved, walking into the living room like a man stepping onto a battlefield. Lena was standing near the bookshelf, flipping through a folder, her movements slow and deliberate. She wasn't in a rush. She wasn't even looking at me anymore. That stung in a way I didn't expect. Lena. She didn't look up. I tried again. We should talk about this. She turned a page, calm as ever. We already did. No, we didn't. I stepped closer, lowering my voice like that might change something. You made up your mind before I even had a chance to explain. That finally got a reaction. She let out a short, humorless laugh and set the folder down, crossing her arms as she faced me. Explain? Her eyebrows lifted slightly, like she couldn't believe I had the nerve.
All right.
Go ahead. Explain. I opened my mouth, closed it, because I had nothing. No excuse, no defense, no half-truths that wouldn't sound ridiculous when spoken out loud. The receipt, the recording, the lies, I had boxed myself in so neatly that there was no way out. Lena smirked, shaking her head. That's what I thought. She turned back to her papers, flipping through them like I wasn't even in the room. And for the first time, I realized what was happening. This wasn't just a fight. This was a removal. A clean break. She was erasing me from her life in real time, like I had already been replaced by something better. I finally forced myself to move, sitting down on the couch with the envelope still untouched beside me. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Then finally I reached for it. Inside were the divorce papers. Already signed. I stared at them, my mind struggling to process the sheer finality of it. You already had these drawn up? Lena's voice was casual, like we were discussing dinner plans. A few days ago. A few days. So she had known. She had known before I even got home. She had known when she looked me in the eye and asked about my fake business trip. She had been testing me. And I had failed. I swallowed, flipping through the pages. She wasn't asking for much. No fights over money. No ridiculous demands. Just done.
Clean.
Simple. Like I had never mattered at all. This is ridiculous. She hummed, not looking up. Is it? You're really throwing everything away over one mistake? That finally made her pause. Lena tilted her head, considering me for a long, quiet moment. Then she walked over, standing just in front of me, arms still crossed. One mistake, she repeated softly. I nodded, pushing forward. It didn't mean anything. She laughed then. Really laughed. The kind that sent a sinking feeling straight into my gut.
Wow.
She exhaled, shaking her head. You really don't get it. I frowned. What are you talking about? Lena leaned in slightly, just enough that I could see the sharpness in her gaze, the cold steel behind her words. I stopped being your wife a long time ago, she said. You just didn't notice. Something in my chest twisted. Her voice wasn't angry. It wasn't even bitter. It was free. I stared at her, trying to understand what the hell had just happened. Lena. No, she straightened, stepping back. I'm not doing this with you. I don't need to hear why, or how it wasn't serious, or whatever excuse you think might change my mind. She gestured toward the papers. Sign them. My mouth felt dry. And if I don't? Lena smirked, grabbing her phone off the table. Then I filed them myself. That was it. No threats. No fights. Because she knew she had already won. I had lost her before I even knew she was leaving. I didn't sign the papers that night. Not because I thought she'd change her mind. Not because I believed I could fix this. But because signing them meant admitting it was real. And I wasn't ready for that. Lena, though? She was already gone. Lena didn't wait for me to sign the papers. She wasn't pacing, wasn't watching, wasn't hovering over me with some desperate need for closure. She had left the room, gone upstairs, and I was left sitting on the couch with the divorce papers in front of me like they were a ticking bomb. I ran my hands down my face, breathing deep, trying to force some kind of logic into the situation. This isn't real. This isn't happening. But it was. And the worst part? I could feel the house shifting around me. Not physically, but in ownership. This wasn't my space anymore. I noticed things I hadn't before, how clean the coffee table was, how the books on the shelf were arranged just so, how the scent in the air wasn't just Lena's perfume, but something deeper. A life that no longer included me. She had been erasing me before I even walked through the door. I glanced at the stairs, listening for movement. Nothing. She wasn't waiting for a fight. She was waiting for me to leave. I stood up, pacing, running through every possible way out of this. If I denied everything hard enough, would she cave? If I told her what she wanted to hear, could I salvage this? But then I looked at the papers again. She had already signed. She wasn't fighting for this marriage. She was dismantling it. That realization hit harder than I expected. I had thought, at least she'll be hurt. At least there'd be screaming or something, some kind of proof that what we had still mattered enough to shatter. But Lena wasn't breaking. She was letting go. And that stung worse than any slap across the face. I took a deep breath and forced myself upstairs. The bedroom door was open, but Lena wasn't inside. She had left the light on, though, and that was almost worse because when I stepped inside, I saw what she had done. Half the closet was empty. The drawers on her side of the dresser were open, cleared out. The jewelry box she always kept on the nightstand?
Gone.
She hadn't just signed the papers. She had already moved out. I clenched my jaw, staring at the empty space in the closet where her clothes used to be. My brain tried to process it, but my body was already reacting, heat rising in my chest, a tightness forming in my throat that I refused to acknowledge. This wasn't her running away. This was her choosing to leave before I could beg her to stay. I turned and left the bedroom, heading back downstairs, my mind a tangled mess of anger, disbelief, and something I didn't want to call regret. Lena was in the kitchen now, standing at the counter, scrolling through her phone like nothing was happening. Like this wasn't a monumental moment. Like I wasn't even in the house. I stopped at the doorway, gripping the frame. "Where are you staying?" She didn't look up. "Does it matter?" "Lena." Finally, she glanced up, her expression unreadable. "With a friend." A friend. I should have let it go. I should have taken that as my answer and moved on. But my mind went to him. The idea of her moving on with someone else was like a sucker punch to the gut. I could feel the jealousy creeping in, twisting inside me like something ugly and bitter. And for the first time I realized this was what she must have felt. This sinking, helpless rage. I deserved it, but that didn't make it easier. "You don't have to do this," I said, my voice lower now, more controlled. Lena exhaled, rubbing her temple. "Do what?"
This.
I gestured vaguely. "Throw everything away over a mistake." Her eyes flicked up to mine, sharp and unimpressed. "A mistake?" I said nothing. She let out a small, humorless laugh. "You think I packed up half my life over a mistake?" I hated that she looked so damn calm. I wanted to see anger.
Pain.
Anything that proved I had meant something.
But Lena was past that.
She had already let go. And suddenly, I was the only one left clinging to something dead. She pushed the papers toward me. "You can sign them tonight," she said, "or I'll file them in the morning." Simple.
Direct.
No hesitation. I stared at the papers, at the neat curve of her signature at the bottom. I thought about tearing them up. Thought about throwing them across the room, forcing her to actually fight me on this, forcing her to prove that what we had was real. But that was the problem, wasn't it? I was the only one who still needed proof. Lena was already gone. I took the pen. My hand didn't shake, didn't hesitate. I signed my name at the bottom of the page, pressing down harder than I needed to, as if the force alone would make it mean less. But it didn't. Lena nodded once. Then she grabbed the papers, folded them neatly, and slid them into her bag. That was it. No argument. No tears.
Just done.
She grabbed her keys, slung her bag over her shoulder, and walked past me without a second glance. And I let her go. Because for the first time since this whole thing started, I understood. She had left me long before I even noticed she was gone. The sound of the door closing was quieter than I expected. Not a slam. Not an exclamation point at the end of a fight. Just a simple, final click. I stood there, staring at the space where Lena had been just seconds ago, my ears straining for any sound that might suggest she was coming back. A pause. A hesitation. A second thought. But there was nothing. She was gone. And the silence that followed was louder than anything else. I sat on the couch, staring at nothing, feeling a strange weight settle over me. She hadn't yelled. She hadn't begged me to explain myself, hadn't clung to some desperate hope that I'd suddenly turn into a better man. She had just walked away. And I was left sitting in our house, in our living room, realizing for the first time that it was only mine now. I glanced around, noticing details I had never paid attention to before. The way the books on the shelf were organized just the way she liked them. The blanket she always kept folded at the edge of the couch. The small, decorative candles she used to light in the evenings, now untouched. None of it felt like mine. It felt like a leftover life. A space she had vacated, leaving behind nothing but shadows of who we used to be. Calling the wrong person. I reached for my phone before I could stop myself. Thumb hovering over Lena's name. I wasn't even sure what I wanted to say. Maybe something stupid, like I'm sorry or come back or let's fix this. But I knew how that conversation would go. Lena would pick up, already expecting the call. She'd listen, maybe let me stumble through my half-hearted apology. And then, in that same calm, unwavering voice, she'd tell me there was nothing left to fix. So I did something worse. I scrolled down my contacts, past mutual friends, past family, past anyone who might actually give me decent advice, until I landed on Claire. I stared at her name, my thumb hesitating. We hadn't spoken since the reunion. Since the hotel. Since I walked away from her room thinking I had gotten away with it. Now, standing in the wreckage of my marriage, I wasn't even sure what I wanted from her. Comfort? Distraction? A reminder that someone still wanted me? I called before I could think better of it. The phone rang twice before she picked up. Her voice was warm, easy. Hey, stranger. Like nothing had changed. Like she hadn't played a role in everything I had just lost. I swallowed. Hey. She chuckled softly. Didn't think I'd hear from you again. I hesitated, then forced a smirk into my voice. That a complaint? No, she said, voice playful. More like a pleasant surprise. I exhaled slowly. You busy? Claire hummed, considering. That depends. Are you calling because you're bored, or because you're lonely? I tensed. Because she wasn't wrong. And somehow, that made the whole thing feel pathetic. I let out a short, dry laugh. You always this direct? Only when it matters. I rubbed a hand over my face, my exhaustion catching up to me. Lena left. Silence. Then, softer. I figured she would. Something about the way she said it made my stomach twist, like she had known before I did. I could hear the shift in her voice, the change in tone. Not pity. Not even guilt. Just opportunity. I know a place, Claire said. Not far from me. We could grab a drink. I almost said yes. I almost let the wreckage pull me under, let myself fall back into old habits, let myself pretend for one more night that none of this was real. But then I looked around the empty house again. And for the first time, I saw it clearly. Claire wasn't the answer. She was just another escape. And I was done running. I took a breath, steadying myself. I don't think that's a good idea. Claire didn't sound offended. If anything, she sounded amused. You sure?
No.
But I was sure enough.
Yeah.
I hesitated, then added, Take care, Claire. Then I ended the call before she could say anything else. Before she could pull me under. Before I made the same mistake twice. I set the phone down and leaned back, staring at the ceiling. Everything felt heavy. The weight of what I'd done. The weight of what I'd lost. The weight of knowing that, for the first time in my life, there was no one left to catch me when I fell. No wife waiting upstairs. No warm voice on the other end of the phone telling me it was okay. Just me. Alone. In a house that felt more like a graveyard than a home. And the worst part? I deserved it. I woke up on the couch with a stiff neck, my body aching like I'd been in a fight. Maybe I had, just not the kind that left bruises on the outside. The living room was dim, the only light coming from the street lamp outside. I had no idea what time it was, but it didn't really matter. Time didn't mean anything when there was nothing waiting for you on the other side of it. I sat up slowly, running a hand over my face. My phone was still on the table, screen dark, untouched since I hung up on Claire. No messages. No missed calls. Lena hadn't checked in. She wasn't wondering where I was, wasn't waiting for me to reach out, wasn't sitting somewhere regretting her decision. She was done. For the first time, I really let myself sit with that truth. Not fight it. Not deny it. Just feel it. I stood up and wandered through the house, letting my fingers graze over furniture, over memories. The framed photos on the walls, most of them had both of us in them. Trips we took. Smiles that felt real. Moments I had convinced myself would last forever. I stopped in the hallway, staring at one in particular. Lena and I on our honeymoon. She was laughing at something I had said, her eyes bright, her face turned toward me like I was the only thing in the world that mattered. I tried to remember what I had said to make her laugh like that. Tried to remember what it had felt like to be the man she looked at that way. I couldn't. Somewhere along the line, I had stopped being him. Somewhere along the line, I had forgotten what it meant to be someone worth loving. What losing really feels like. I walked into the bedroom. The space was colder than I remembered. Her side of the bed was empty, the sheets pulled tight, untouched. I sat down on the edge, staring at the nightstand where her jewelry box used to be. It hit me then. Not just the loneliness, not just the regret, but the loss. The kind of loss that doesn't come from a single mistake, but from 1,000 small ones. From the way I let things slip through the cracks. From the nights I came home late without thinking twice. From the way I let distance settle between us until it was too wide to cross. The affair wasn't the first betrayal.
It was just the last.
And now there was no fixing it. No grand gesture. No last-minute confession that would make her come running back. Lena wasn't coming back. And for the first time, I understood what that really meant. I stood up, walked downstairs, and grabbed the divorce papers. They felt lighter than I expected. Maybe because the real weight was never in the paper, it was in what I had done to make her leave. I picked up the pen and signed. Not out of anger. Not out of resentment. But because holding on to something already lost was worse than letting it go. The next morning, I dropped the papers off at her lawyer's office. No dramatic moment. No last conversation. Just a simple, quiet end to a life that wasn't mine anymore. As I walked back to my car, I realized something. This wasn't just the end of my marriage. This was the start of something else. Something unknown. Something I had no idea how to handle. For the first time in years, there was no routine. No predictability. No wife waiting for me at home. Just me. Alone. And maybe for the first time, I had to figure out who the hell I really was. That night, I went to bed alone. No warm body next to me. No scent of her perfume on the pillow. No sound of her breathing in the dark. And for the first time, it finally sank in. I didn't just cheat on my wife. I lost her. For good. And I had no one to blame but myself.